Hello and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about something we have kind of mentioned every so often in other shows called parasocial interaction and parasocial relationships, and how it relates to our media consumption of things like both real life people as well as fictional characters. But before we get into this, as always, please subscribe, like, comment, share. Randall, what's the best way to reach us?
Just go to our website, chrisandrandall.com, and there's various ways to reach us. Our Facebook page is pretty good if you're on Facebook.
Yeah, because what we want to do is we're really trying to foster a relationship with you. We want to hear what you think. We want to get a dialogue going. You know, we want to have a level of connectivity. We want you to feel like we're your friends and that you know, like this show is like Randall, myself, and you hanging out for about an hour, talking about stuff in arts and entertainment. Now, the downside is we don't get to hear what you have to say. And Randall, we want to hear, right? We want to hear what
Oh, yeah. Just send us a message and maybe we'll respond.
And not only that, but we might even just do a show where we respond to a lot of messages. Now, you know, I think that I don't know you personally, but I've looked at our stats, Randall, and according to YouTube viewership, I know a lot of the people who listen and watch us, well, I guess watch us because it's YouTube, they're around our age, between their, 40s and 50s. It's an even split of men and women. Many of them live in the United States. Many of them live in LA or the East Coast.
Yeah, most of our listeners, viewers, subscribers are from Los Angeles.
Yeah, and most of them we have a lot in common. So that probably allows you or if you're watching this, you're listening to us going, yeah, I kind of know where those guys are coming from, and it builds a good kind of bond. Now, it is true that the majority of our listeners are our friends in real life.
Like in real life, yeah.
Yeah, we're like, hey, I got a podcast. Could you please subscribe? Could you please listen? It's a lot of work. I need to feel something. And I know this because occasionally a friend of mine will actually comment to me in passing about something you said, Randall, or I said. And I'm like, oh, well, could you just write it down and not just tell it to me, over the phone or when we're drinking coffee? Anyway, if you're not really friends with Randall or Chris, me, why am I referring to myself in the third person? But you feel, you feel like we are your friends because we put out a new show normally every week, and we've been doing it for about a year and a half. You feel like that, then you are in a parasocial relationship with us, which is okay. And it's kind of okay. Don't feel bad. It's all right. If you want to go out and get to know us better, I'm sure Randall and I can arrange that. So let me give you just the most simple description, Randall, of what we mean by parasocial relationship. So parasocial interaction refers to a psychological relationship. It's an illusionary experience where an audience interacts with personas that could be like a talk show host, a celebrity, fictional characters, as if they were engaged in a reciprocal relationship with them. The term was first coined by Donald Horton and Richard Wall in 1956. These are professional psychologists.
And I just want to point out that 56, it's like TV had just existed for like maybe 10 years at that point, and radio had existed for decades.
Yeah, maybe 20. 30 years, but you're right. Media as we knew it was modern media as we knew it, records, TV, radio, these were all coming in. And the field of study has been growing and growing. So parasocial interaction becomes a parasocial relationship. And this is the key. After repeated exposure causes the media user, that's us, the audience, to develop illusions of intimacy, friendship and identification. Positive information learned about the media persona results in increased attraction, uh, friendship, and results in increased attraction and helps develop the relationship. Uh, Parasocial relationships are enhanced due to trust and self-disclosure provided by the media persona. Certainly something you and I are doing all the time is we're disclosing about our lives. We want your trust. Media users are loyal and feel directly connected to the persona as they are connected to their close friends. And this is also really key. It's not just the repetition, but it is the intimacy that they're like a buddy. By observing and interpreting their appearance, their gesture, their voice, and conversation and conduct. So you get to see every element of this person visually, and you're looking at them and you're assessing them as if you were assessing a person standing right in front of you that you're having a beer or a coffee with. And what happens because of this is that these media personas have a significant amount of influence over media users, both positive and negative, informing the ways they perceive certain topics, or even their purchasing habits, and as I like to say, much, much more. Now, I just want to say, as a disclaimer, Randall and I are not professional psychologists or sociologists or cultural anthropologists. So there's a lot of great academic research in the field. Just Wikipedia, parasocial relationships or parasocial interaction, and you will see some great work. And it is, because it is a topic in contemporary media studies and psychology, there will be some debate about certain things that we say or assume. So this is really what I want to call armchair social criticism that we're about to engage in. But what we're both really interested is, we want to look at how parasocial relationships, and we're going to use these two words interchangeably, parasocial interaction and parasocial relationship, how they play out in arts and entertainment in our own lives, which is something that we are experts in, and in the world of contemporary fandom, which is something else we're all experts in. So I do want to say something right off the bat, Randall. Do you think that you suffer from having in your life parasocial relationships?
I don't think it's ever been a strong component of my life. I've never been one of those.
You're wrong. I'm just telling you, every human being who grows up in modern Western culture, especially American culture, we all experience parasocial relationships, and it's okay. And normally it starts at the beginning of our lives, right? Because we're Gen X kids, and like most Gen X kids or Boomer kids, even a few of you millennial kids, we all grew up with a television. So when you were a little kid and you were learning about the world, say like sometime between the ages of 7 and 10, was there any fictional character on TV you identified with?
Well, the fictional character I most liked as a kid was Dr. Spock on Star Trek, and I think that's an experience a lot of boys have. I guess, I don't know, Chris. I think autistic kids have an identification with Spock, I've heard, but I've been accused of being autistic.
Dr. Spock is the child psychologist. I know someone's going to say that, but yeah, Mr. Spock.
I'm talking about. Oh yeah. Well, he's a doctor on Star Trek, isn't he? Oh
well,
no,
he should be. He's a science
maybe he's
officer.
just Mr. Spock. All right, I already screwed it up, Chris. Go on. Let's go on. Let's move on. Let's pretend I didn't screw it up.
I have to say, for those of you true Star Trek aficionados who are thinking, wait, if he's a science officer, doesn't he have to have a degree in something, like a PhD? So wouldn't a science officer also be a doctor? Well, this is really what I'm talking about with personal parasocial relationships, is that instead of seeing Spock as just a character Gene Roddenberry whipped out because he wanted an alien who looked like a devil, you're really thinking of Spock as if he really was a science officer serving on an exploratory vessel in the 22nd century, 23rd century in space. Now, the thing about Star Trek when we were growing up, the original series, is it was on in syndication. It was on 5 days or more a week. So I grew up in New York City. For me, it was on at like, I think 4 o'clock. So normally by the time I got home from school, I could I could watch at least one full episode.
Yeah, it was on like a syndication for me too. Of course, it was on like every day, just about every day.
Right. And then the thing about Star Trek, and it really is important as a boy to understand, is that there were other characters you could have chosen to identify with. Like technically, the star of the show is Captain Kirk, who is handsome, strong, great with the ladies, a brilliant tactician, seems to have an answer for every problem. Then there's, Dr. McCoy, who's old and wise. There's Scotty, who's indulgent and humorous and clever. There's a lot of other characters that you could identify with, but Spock is smart, and Spock seems a little bit like not part of the group. And I think when you're a young boy, I think because you're in school, right? You want to be smart, right? That's a goal we aspire to as young boys.
Well, weren't you telling me in your research on this, a lot of young boys like intelligent characters?
Yeah, a lot of young boys like intelligent characters. And I was talking to my girlfriend, who is a professor of psychology, and I asked her who she liked as a kid, and she named like literally all the female characters who were smart ass. So I'm like, okay, fair enough. Even young girls like smart, and they also like monsters. And I think the reason they like monsters or creatures is because when you're a child, you identify with people who are not yet adults who feel different and stand out. And Spock wasn't just smart, but he was also different. He was part of the team, but not part of the team. And I think that's how a lot of kids feel growing up. And Spock's not a bad. I mean, look, at that time there was a Star Trek cartoon as well. You remember the Saturday morning cartoon with Spock?
Yeah, I watched that.
Right, and there was Spock Lives, and there was a lot of like extra. There was a comic book produced by Gold Key. Like there was a book Leonard Nimoy wrote called "I Am Not Spock," But then he hosted a TV series called "In Search of," where it was a docudrama it was a syndicated docudrama where Leonard Nimoy would deal with unsolved mysteries that had to do with like the Bermuda Triangle and UFOs, clearly cashing in on his Spock-like appearance. So
yeah, I was just thinking about this. Maybe another reason I like Spock, and I don't know if I knew this when I was a kid, but he's a mixed race person. Maybe I liked him for that reason too. I mean, because he's more like, because he's mixed species. This guy.
Right. No, but I could get it.
I am also mixed race.
Yeah, and Leonard Nimoy is Jewish, and he has very prominent Semitic features. And as a Jew, I could relate to Leonard Nimoy and his Semitic-like. He even said that he got the live long and prosper from the Jewish tradition. I don't know how, but for him, it was kind of like rabbinical. It's very funny. William Shatner is also Jewish. Didn't know it growing up, but I never identified with William Shatner, though technically I could have just as easily. But no, because he wasn't smart, was not his thing. Now, at the same time as a small boy, and that same age range, or a little younger, I watched Mr. Rogers. Did you ever watch Mr. Rogers as a kid?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Right. So we all watched Mr. Rogers. That is a thing. Again, 5 days a week. I'm pretty sure early in the morning, but don't ask me when. And it was an interesting show. I can't believe I have to describe Fred Rogers because it always opened up that Fred Rogers would come in, take off his shoes, put on his slippers, take off his jacket, put on a cardigan, sit down, and break the fourth wall immediately and say, "How are you? How you doing?" And communicate directly with you, the viewer. And because you're a kid, I felt that he was really speaking to me. Anytime a person breaks the fourth wall, if you're watching, at some point you're going to really believe they're in. Look how I'm doing it right now by moving my face. Like somehow this is creating the illusion. But you at home right now, I'm speaking to you. Don't you feel that when I say you at home, I'm speaking to you, or listener, I'm speaking to you? Don't you feel like I'm actually speaking to you?
Yeah, so you're fostering a parasocial interaction the same way that talk show hosts, newscasters will do it. Mr. Rogers, who else does it?
Yeah,
Well, any
all of
character
that.
on a fictional show that talks directly to the audience. Okay, so
Yeah.
like I'm thinking of Malcolm in the Middle. I'm thinking of Sex in the City.
But at the beginning of our childhood, there was Fred Rogers, who would interact, by the way, with fictional people like King Faraday. So already creating the confusion of, is King Faraday also a real person or
Well,
creature?
I think Mr.
Because
Rogers, in his thinking, he was trying to create for the kids like an obvious distinction between the real world and the fake world. But but then you put on top of that he's on the television, it becomes more confusing. I don't know. I think it worked
it
for him
get,
though.
but it becomes confusing because as a young person who's having, when you're a child, you have a hard time discerning reality. Uh, it becomes his, so King Faraday is also then real. Anyway, Fred Rogers, much like Spock, really try to inculcate positive values, and that's a good thing. So I don't mean that's a bad thing. I'm just saying at a very early age, it kind of it seeps into us, and then as we get into adolescence, and this is psychological research, they show that adolescence, part of the individuation process in which we separate ourselves from our parents, is by looking at these celebrities and fictional characters from our own generation that we revere, and copying their style, copying their look, copying their persona, so that we can feel like we're in a more socially acceptable role among our peers and drawing a line between us and our parents. And that sounds super heady. So I'm going to be a little bit more blunt. Like we've talked about this on a different show, MTV. MTV was very much a parasocial relationship, albeit I know what you're saying, it's not a person, but MTV was 24/7 when I was a teenager, and you saw those VJs all day, all night. And because they didn't have a lot of videos, you would see Billy Idol and Duran Duran like literally almost every hour on the hour, all day, all night. And at this point, as a teenager, they were being interviewed on MTV, Rolling Stone, all these other magazines were putting out interviews with them. They were doing radio interviews. They were ubiquitous enough for you to go, and I'll pick on Duran Duran because I really like Duran Duran a lot. Like those guys wore really great clothing. They had a really cool way of looking at the world. And, if you went to a store that sold clothing that looked similar by design to the kind of clothing that maybe, remember Michael Jackson's Beat It sweater, how everyone wanted to wear it?
Hmm. Well, yeah. So what you're describing is celebrity interviews and celebrities appearing in the media. It's you could look at it as a way to foster the parasocial relationship. Um, and yes, Chris.
So an aesthetic level, and I don't know about you, on an aesthetic level, the music, pop, new wave people of the 80s very much were informing my own aesthetic choices. How about you? We've talked about this on MTV, like when you were a teenager, were you getting your marching orders from like Kurt Cobain?
Well, we've never talked about this before, Chris, but I feel like I wasn't very good as a youth at identity formation and trying to choose an identity. So yes, I did like Kurt Cobain. I think Nirvana and Kurt Cobain were like my main identification, but I've never felt a very strong identification, I don't think. But yeah, Kurt
Well,
Cobain probably the strongest.
the thing about Kurt Cobain, and we'll get into the transition point here, is Kurt Cobain isn't just an aesthetic look. It's actually not much of an aesthetic look at all. But Kurt Cobain knew how to articulate the pain of being a teenager and feeling alienated and estranged.
Yeah, so Kurt Cobain, he had a tough childhood, divorce, jumped around from family to family, place to place. And so, I think me and a lot of kids of that generation probably definitely identified with that. And he said a sort of like ironic detachment from the world. He may, his ironic detachment from the world, though, may have been like a defense mechanism, because maybe he was a little bit more engaged than he let on.
And because he was so iconoclast, where he was like, not about corporate rock. He had that line, because adults didn't get him, because of his detachment, because of his snarkiness to our generation, we felt there was an honesty to Kurt Cobain, as if he really knew us in a way that Michael Jackson or Billy Idol or Billy Joel did.
Well, for a certain generation, the Kurt Cobain generation, there's a certain like I already said ironic detachment from the world. Like Kurt Cobain went on the cover of Rolling Stone wearing a T-shirt that said "Corporate magazines still suck."
Yeah, right. So he was willing to take it on.
Well, it's the whole idea of selling out still existed, and I don't think kids today have that kind of perception of the world. And yeah, I think that was a moment. That was a brief moment where. Like the MTV show Daria, I think is a good example. That was a brief moment where just Roger Ebert, he said for a time everything in movies, everything any character said in movies was in quotations. He said it was the era of being ironic, right? And it's over now.
Right, but I think when you are going from like say ages 13 to 23. It's a humongous period of developmental time, but you are questioning authority, you're questioning norms, you're trying to find who you are. You get very attracted to either fictional people like the Wolverine, who's not like Superman. He's bad. He likes porn. He drinks beer, and he kills people. And the Punisher, same deal. Like you start gravitating, at least as a boy, more towards those kinds of personas that are fictional. And then conversely, there are talk show hosts and shock jocks that really formed me. So like during that same period, we're talking about the 80s to the 90s, I really get heavily into watching Late Night with David Letterman. 5 nights a week, David Letterman, totally snarked, totally ironic detachment. When he interviews a celebrity, he was going to do it not in the way that Johnny did. He was gonna make them sweat it out. And I remember like we would talk about whatever David Letterman said the next day. Hey, did you see that? Did you see Larry Bud Melman? Did you see Flytown or Bugtown? Were you a fan of David Letterman?
No, I wasn't. I was a fan of Conan O'Brien's first couple of years though, with Robert Smigel and Louis C.K. who were
right because they would do crazy things. Right, Conan was another bad boy of late night.
Right. Yeah. I never looked at David Letterman as part of that whole. Ironic detachment era. Do you see him that way then?
Oh hell yeah! But then again, I'm 10 years older than you, so the David Letterman that I'm talking about is not the guy who would host his own 11:30 show. I'm talking about the dude who comes on after Carson, before Tom Snyder, who no one seems to care about, who's just left to do his own craziness, which is kind of what Conan ended up inherited from David Letterman, so that mantle was there. And another person who, strangely enough, crosses right into the Letterman world was Howard Stern. I listened to Howard Stern 5 days a week. I lived in New York City, so I actually got to listen to Howard Stern broadcasting in the New York City station WNBC. And then when he moved over to, I can't remember the FM station, but I switched from him at WNBC, where he gave a lot of crap to Don Imus, to whatever the FF station was, where he gave a lot of crap to Allison Steele. So again, Howard Stern, very irreverent. Always getting in trouble with the FCC, talking about his bowels, talking about his wife, talking about his kids.
I heard him on an interview one time. He said that, especially in the early days when he really picked up steam, if he ever felt like not saying something, like he shouldn't say something, he used that as his cue to say it.
Yeah, exactly. So my favorite person to ever be on Howard Stern was always Joan Rivers. Because Joan Rivers would give as good as he got, like she would just be all over him, and he could eat like the two Yentas, and it was so, I felt like I knew these people. These were my people. Let me say something else about Howard Stern, because he became kind of famous for his celebrity interviews, because he was one of the only people in media who would ask uncouth questions of celebrities and try to puncture their parasocial image, shall we say. Yeah.
And the ironic effect of that, however, was that he made them even more relatable. And I think he even furthered the parasocial relationship with the audience of these celebrities even further, because now people knew more about them and felt even closer to them.
Absolutely. And you know, he'd also like look. Letterman was one of the early guys to goof on his staff and show the guy holding the cue cards. But like Howard would really like get into these deep arguments with Gary Delabate and with Jackie, the joke man, and other people on his staff. And sometimes he would be funny with them, but sometimes it just seemed like he was angry at them,
Yeah,
or
some
they
of
were
those
angry at
arguments
each
seem
other.
very real. Yes.
Right. So you sometimes really felt like it wasn't just all show and jokes. Sometimes it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, is Gary gonna quit? Is Jackie gonna quit?
But you know what?
Jackie and Gary gonna get into a fight?
They lasted for years. But you know what? You can never really know how real any of those interactions were.
Oh, it could have all been staged like wrestling. But my point was, but you're absolutely right, and that is true. But you're watching it and you're listening to really listening. No, they used to broadcast every Saturday the Howard Stern show, and you can still watch him on Sirius on video. But he really felt like everything that was going on with Howard Stern because he was so honest and so open and so unscripted. Even though he was so like raw that you felt like you were really in the room with Howard. And even if you didn't like what Howard had to say, I know a lot of people who don't agree with Howard in any way. They'd still listen to Howard because there was somehow they just felt like he was in the room with you. You know what I'm saying? Even if it wasn't a wish fulfillment, at least he was a real presence that you could connect with. A lot to be said more about this, but let's move on to the other element of daytime. And daytime really does seem to be a lot where we learn our parasocial relationship, which is the daytime talk show and the soap operas. And, when I was a kid, when I was sick, and I got sick a lot, I would stay at home and, everyone was gone. And the only people I had communication with were the people who were on, not communicating, you know what I'm saying? You're by yourself all day. It's 9 in the morning. Mom's not going to be home until later in the day, or no one's going to be around until lunchtime or later. So your friends are at school. You're going to hang out with soap operas and talk show hosts. So uh, let's start with the talk show first. So the talk show, because we've already been talking about late night talk shows, let's talk about the parasocial relationship with the daytime talk show.
Yeah, sure.
So
Well, there's an
Norm,
obvious parasocial relationship that the audience is
yeah,
developing with the host of the talk show. I mean, the host of the talk show, purports to be themselves and sitting there right in front of you. They talk to the camera, they talk to the guest. They're practically your stand-in for your parasocial relationship with the guest. The talk shows, they're developing a strong parasocial relationship.
and the
And
daytime talk show. And sometimes, by the way, the only thing I disagree with you so far is that you use the singular host, whereas the daytime talk show is normally hosts, plural. You're going
like
to hang out with the
the View, for
girls. You're
instance,
going to hang
right?
out with the girls from The View, or maybe you're going to listen to Heidi and Coda, or Regis and Kathy Lee. Oh, wait, they're long gone now. So you're going to read Kelly Ripa and Ryan Seacrest. And every day it's like let's pretend for just a second we were morning talk. Hi, welcome to Arts and Entertainment with Chris and Randall. I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Hey, Randall, how was your weekend?
Oh, it was great. I went horseback riding.
Oh, really? Up out in Montclair. That's a wonderful place to go horseback riding. Kelly and I, we sometimes like to do that, though. Kelly and I, we had to stay in this week because we went. Her family was coming over, and we had to get the house straightened. You ever have to get your house ready for when family's coming over?
Oh yeah, but it's worth it to just have some family over. It's so much fun.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I'm not a really big fan of Kelly's father-in-law. He's not my favorite person. But hey, what are you gonna do? So now, unlike evening shows where it's more like I'm gonna open up, I'm gonna do a monologue. There's gonna be some comedy. Then we're gonna bring in a celebrity, a musician. We're gonna chitty chat. No, morning shows really start by talking about hey, this is what's going on in our lives, and
Right. They talk. Right. As
we're
if they're a
establishing
friend of yours.
rapport. Yeah,
Right.
and
As if they're a friend of yours. They're
yeah.
talking about their life, telling you what they did last weekend. Yeah, exactly.
I saw Free Guy. It's really funny. Did you see Free Guy? We're gonna have Ryan on later this week. Ryan, not you, Ryan, Randall, but the other one, and we're gonna talk to him about. I gotta say, every time I go to the movie theater, what's your favorite? I like Milk Duds. I know everyone loves popcorn, but ladies and gentlemen, just a quick show of hands. Who here loves Milk Duds? Yeah, right. Okay, great. Well, we brought Milk Duds and popcorn. We're going to learn today, by the way, how to make your own Milk Duds. So you can make them just like them. So that's the thing. It's a lot like the ladies' home journal. Daytime talk shows not only have guests, celebrities, but they also have things that you can use in your own life, like how to make great food, or where to shop, or what the new spring fashions will be like. These are things that we know we're thinking about what you need every day, and we're providing you with that information. Now, I rarely like to talk about this. Uh, First off, the daytime talk show is really even morning news at this point. From 5:30 to whenever the afternoon starts. Even morning news basically has a little bit of news and a lot of the same deal. I used to go on TV and do stuff on toast making, and I remember very much what you have to pitch, like who are their target audience, what can you offer their viewer, and you have to be personable and likable. And the person who's interviewing you will often say, yeah, I gave a terrible wedding toast when I was at my niece's wedding, and it was so embarrassing. What, Chris? How do you not do that? So that it's not like it's like we're just sitting here on a couch. There's two mugs of coffee. We're not maybe touching the mugs of coffee, but maybe you are at home watching us and you've got your coffee. So let's all have a sip. So that kind of illusion of rapport. Weirdly enough, by the way, when I was a kid, David Letterman did have a morning talk show, and I did watch it, and it was very strange. A guy would come out to read the actual the morning news, and then David Letterman would start his show.
Would you say that
Edwin
David
Newman would just come out and just read like the news.
Would you say the David Letterman of that morning show was a different David Letterman of the show he did later?
No, but the show was different. But David Letterman wasn't different, and that's why I think the show failed, because he didn't understand the aesthetic of because I think you can be cool and hip at night, but I think daytime talk show hosts, we just have to be regular folks. We just got to be warm and friendly and trusting. Not a time to be a badass. Unless you're Wendy Williams.
Well, can I just make a brief mention of soap operas?
Well, let's make a large mention of soap operas, because soap operas were in its heyday, not as much today. They were the greatest parasocial relationship for daytime. So let's talk about it.
Well, I mean, yeah, they were huge. There were a lot of women who were housewives. They stayed at home all day. They didn't have a lot of social interaction, so they ended up watching these shows all every day of the week. And so they got to be invested in the lives of these characters. And I mean, yeah, women today don't have the time to watch these shows anymore, and they're probably less isolated than they were. So the soap operas are definitely on their way out. But it is really interesting that that soap operas, I mean, they're a great example of the parasocial interaction effect.
Oh, genius. Look, when I was in grad school, I'm really talking. I'm sorry, folks. This is the episode in where you realize Randall is the better person. So when I was in grad school, did an internship on soap opera. I went to school for playwriting. Very profitable thing, by the way, folks. Go for that. And Procter and Gamble send someone over to teach us about soap opera act writing and how the whole world of soap opera works. So I'm going to dish on soap operas too. So soap operas, which are the only scripted TV that I know of that has no repeats, 5 days a week, 365, 52 weeks a year, with only a few things ever getting bumped. That's a massive amount of content that you've got to put out. And the way that soap operas work is, they have all these different people, like a Bible. They have what the character story is going to be for the year, for 6 months. They have people whose job is to just write the dialogue for the treatment, and so on and so on. But one of the key rules there's a few key rules of soap opera, which is characters don't change that much. I mean, they get into trouble, but the character themselves, anything that happens in a soap opera happens so slowly that if you missed it from like a week, a month, or 6 months, you can catch up pretty quickly and you won't ever get lost. It's almost impossible to watch a soap opera and go, what the hell is going on here? And that's by design. And another thing about soap operas that are really important to know is soap operas have what's called identity characters. These are the characters who you see the most on the soap opera. And the reason why you see them the most on the soap opera is in their market research, people say, I identify with this character the most. Now, have you ever watched a soap opera, Randall, that much?
Only a few episodes, really.
Okay, weirdly enough, it's not always the prettiest actor on the show or the handsomest actor on the show or the youngest actor on that show. It's normally an older actor who's been on that show for a while. But there's something about that character that people look up to or normally identify with. And a dirty little secret they told it me is that some of the soap opera actors are really bad actors. And if they were in any other kind of field, they might have gotten fired, but they can't fire them because the research shows that these particular actors play the characters that have the highest draw. And if you got rid of those actors, people would stop watching the show. And then the other important thing to know about soap operas is, you know why they're called soap operas?
Yeah, why don't you tell us, Chris?
Because they were used to sell soap.
Right.
So
Yeah,
the
they used
point
to sell
is,
soap. They were funded by the soap companies.
right, Procter and Gamble makes soap. So the point is, soap operas it's very fascinating. You actually have companies that make commercial products underwriting scripted shows so that people will get so addicted to seeing these characters with repeated exposure every week that they'll also not notice that they're constantly seeing the same commercials for Ivory soap, and that when they go to the soap opera market, what do they say in advertising? It takes 7 points of contact for you to really brand identify or at least know a product. So if you're constantly getting the same commercials, or at least commercials for the same product every day, 5 days a week, when you go shopping, those are the things that you're also going to have exposure to. So there's a very synergistic or symbiotic relationship in soap operas that you don't even really see in any other form of scripted fictional entertainment.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about the Marvel movies, right? I mean, are the Marvel?
Actually, no. Hold that thought, because I actually want to share one thing. I promise we will, but I don't want to get to that just yet because. So again, this is where people are really going to hate me. I grew up in New York City, and I'm not going to say the soap opera. It's a very big soap opera that was on TV, and it's still on TV, I think. It may have gone off, but where I grew up in a part of Manhattan where a lot of actors lived. So my next door neighbor, whose daughter was my babysitter, she had a really big part on a soap opera rant. So as a small kid, I would see my next door neighbor. I'd hang out in her apartment. I'd see her every day, just about. And also, if I was at home, which again, I had a lot of health issues, I would watch her on TV.
Right, and you'd see her in real life, and you. Hello.
And so it's kind of, it was an interesting thing because when you're really, really young, I guess it's weird. I never really, so this is strange for me and it's unique. I always saw her as my next door neighbor on a TV show, as opposed to the character on the TV show is my next door neighbor. But I didn't really, as at the earliest point of a childhood, I didn't really know that those were two separate worlds. And then as I got a little older, I realized, oh, that is just what my neighbor's mom does for a living. Because, when you're a kid, grown-ups have jobs. All grown-ups seem to have jobs. And her job is, when she's not living next door to me, is to go across town and stand in front of a camera and pretend to be someone she's not. Which I guess in some senses blurs the line between parasocial relationship and not, but it definitely had an effect on me. as
Well,
you can imagine.
did you think she was different in real life as compared to the TV her?
Yeah, and I was a little confused by it when I was a child until I got a little older and I could understand that that was just a role.
Yeah, see, it's good that you had that experience. I think a lot of people who are, not so close to the media, they don't understand that. I've seen many people like first come into contact with celebrities, and they interact with the celebrity as if they know the person, but they don't really know the person. The person is a complete stranger to them, but they don't feel that way.
Well, then let's move on a bit. Oh, actually, it's funny too because she played someone's mom on the TV show. So I'm like, that's not her daughter. I know her daughter. Her daughter's my babysitter. How is this happening? So let's go into the modern world now. And one of the biggest things that really have changed research in this field and changed our lives is the rise of social media, right? Not only do we have TV now, but we've got Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, podcasts, hello,
Hello.
Reddit. So,
Well, let me
Randall,
just
how
make
does that work?
Well, let me just make a little point before we go into it. When the internet first started, it was started by a bunch of internet nerds who, in the early days of the internet, the whole idea, one idea people had was that you could create a form of communication, like an internet forum, where everyone was anonymous and you had no idea who anybody was, and people would just be valued for what they wrote or what they said. It was a democratizing type effect, or it was a democratization of ideas. Where ideas had to float or sink on their own merits. And now we have social media, which which throws that idea away. So everybody knows who you are when you say anything. Excuse me. So in social media gives a lot of people the opportunity to create some really intense parasocial relationships. When you say, Chris,
Absolutely. I mean, because now you're not, TV is a mediated experience, but TV has, as we said, commercials, scripts, what have you. But now you can watch people who are famous or well, let's go with real people in real time, live stream, or write a note, and they can, I like Mark Maron, so I can not only listen to Mark Maron in the podcast, but I can also watch him live stream with this cat, or I can see him say something on Twitter. I know somebody who is a friend of an actor on Twitter, and occasionally she will direct message that actress, and sometimes that actress will respond back to her, and it creates this thing that you're like, oh, wait a second, if you and I are corresponding on Twitter and you're famous, isn't that, and in fairness, if you are, right, there's an economy of social media too, where Kevin Hart became a very big box office draw, right? Because he had 8 million Twitter followers. So he had to cultivate that Twitter following in order to get social leverage. I have friends who are stand-up comics. It's the same deal. They're constantly pushing content on social media because they know that if they can get a large enough following, they can get those people to show up in clubs, and then they can headline clubs. So,
well, it's really, yeah,
social capital to have a following too.
It's really interesting. We have this thing called an influencer now. They don't seem to even do anything except for talk about their quite mundane life. And so it's almost like they've cut out the middleman. Why do you need the pretense of a television show or a talk show or a news show or a fictional show, scripted show? Just get on YouTube and talk directly to the camera, talk about your life, and now you're making content. Now you're developing parasocial relationships with maybe hundreds of thousands of people, maybe millions.
Absolutely, and it's definitely in the millions, and you get sponsorship for both the products on the show. You get advertising space. You can go and endorse things. You can go to events. You have followers. It's more of a Gen Z, the younger generation. But I know, like, a friend of mine watched something called The Strad Man. This young kid, and all he does is buy really expensive cars, drives them around, and he gets big car company endorsements because they want to see what he's up to. So it's still a form of entertainment. We really had to discuss this before we did the show. Are influencers entertainers? Like, yeah, I guess they are. But it's absolutely true that with this, like in real time, here's a great example. On Facebook. I am a member of of the Phil Collins fan page. On the Phil Collins fan page, they announced that Genesis was going on tour in North America. They listed the tour dates. They were all on the East Coast and the Midwest. And I was really annoyed by that. So I wrote, any chance that next year you guys will come out here to Los Angeles? I'd like to see some West Coast dates. And then I got a heart. You know, you can get a like or you can get a heart. And you know who gave me a heart? Phil Collins. Phil Collins, right? Like there's like 9,000 people commenting on the Facebook fan page, but because Chris Corbell, said, hey, Phil, why not you play LA where you've gotten a place? You know, why don't you do that? He gave me a heart. Now, Randall, I have two theories. Either there's a guy whose job is to handle all of Phil Collins' social media, and one of the things he does is oversee Facebook pages. And when a person asks about Phil going to a venue that, you know, he can make money off of, he gives it a heart because he knows the more people who say come to LA, the easier it will be for them to come to LA. Or Phil Collins just chilling at home goes, oh, look at that. Chris Corbell wants me to play LA. That's so sweet of him. I need the validation. I'm going to give him a heart. And he and I, even though we've never met in real life, we're developing this thing where now he gives me hearts.
Okay.
Like only my deepest friends. Which do you think is the reality?
Well, my opinion is definitely the more cynical one. But let me ask you, though, what I'm more interested in is how did you feel when you saw Phil Collins, like, hearted your post?
Oh, I reposted it everywhere. Because, like, see, Phil Collins gave me a heart. Not even you guys give me a heart. Phil Collins loves me, or at least my comment. And Phil Collins is, we're gonna be friends.
What do you mean we're going to be friends? It sounds like you're friends now with Phil Collins.
Right. Well, and I think, you know, the thing about modern technology, let's look at how it even plays out now with fictional characters. So, you know, you as you were saying before about soap operas and the MCU. So this is a great example. You know, Marvel, when I was a kid, I loved Marvel superheroes because they were very realistic. They lived in New York City like I lived. They had problems like I could identify with. I would read 5 comics a week. I'd go to comic conventions. I'd go to comic book stores. I'd meet artists. I'd meet writers. And I'd get to be part of the culture. And now I can watch movies and TV shows where their storylines, just like in the comic book, all interconnect with each other. So I can watch, you know, without even seeing a Hulk movie, I can keep up with the exploits of Dr. Bruce Banner and the Hulk from one movie to a TV show to another movie, as if I was watching a soap opera.
Yeah, you know, and I want to say something about Iron Man. You know, Robert Downey Jr. I mean, you know, there's a lot. There's a lot been made of like how Robert Downey Jr. is very similar in his personal life to Iron Man.
Absolutely. When Jon Favreau cast a recovering alcoholic, Robert Downey Jr., to play an alcoholic who will become an alcoholic in recovery, Tony Stark, everyone was like, and both of them from New York City, you know, and they're bad boys. It's like, oh,
they're also both born relatively privileged and wealthy and from good families and
they're
like
iconoclastic. And, you know, like, is Tony Stark, and same thing with Nick Fury, right? When Marvel did the Ultimates, they redid Nick Fury to look like Samuel L. Jackson. So then when they bring in who plays Nick Fury? Samuel L. Jackson. So is Nick Fury or is Samuel L. Jackson Nick Fury? You're right. Marvel really, more than even DC, really capitalizes on the persona.
Right,
sometimes.
you know, you're right, Chris. I never thought about that, but Marvel really is fostering these parasocial interactions way more than DC. I mean, maybe this is the problem with DC. I mean, because DC is casting like serious actors who want to do serious acting. Like Christian Bale is a perfect example. Where really what they should be finding are like people who want to inhabit the character, you know, like Marvel does.
You should say that because I have a friend who is deep into cosplay and he loves Batman, and I don't mean this is. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. but he was a big fan of Batman the comic and the arts and the cons and the movies, and he builds Batman costumes based not on the comic book, interestingly, as much. Sometimes built on the comic book, but often based on the different Batman movies that came out over the years. And he finds out what kind of materials they used, who the designers were, the shapes, and he really works very hard to recreate it. And then he goes to the con and he'll wander around the con dressed as Batman, trying to sound like the Batman, making the Batman moves. He'll even hang out with other people who are trying to be Catwoman or Joker, and they have these groups that will do like short films or do poses. And look, if I don't know if you've ever seen any of the con photos, like from San Diego Comic Cons, but people who do cosplay are not doing Halloween costume. I mean, they're spending a lot of money and a lot of hours to build things and also to keep their bodies in condition to play these people. So
Right. Yeah.
I feel like that is a parasocial relationship, right?
Well, I think that they're having a parasocial relationship with the character, but then interestingly, the cosplayer they step through the mirror and they become the character, and then they start interacting with people as that character. So they've reversed the relationship where they've now become the character. And then they want to have the parasocial relationship with the fans. I mean, it's fascinating to think about. I mean, so I mean that's an example of how these parasocial relationships they can happen both ways, and also like the root of some of these relationships is maybe. I mean, I guess this is in the research that you've done. The roots of some of these relationships are that these people you have these relationships with, you would like to be them. They have qualities you want. You would want in yourself. Young kids model themselves after these characters. They use these characters as a way to form their identity.
Absolutely. And also within the cosplay, there's a desire to take something from the illusionary world, the world of fantasy, and try to bring it into real life. Try to make it real. Now, I want to say something about it. I would say that, in my opinion, cosplay people are artists because they're not trying to be someone they're not. They're trying to take some form of imagination and bring it into the world through their own interpretation. And, you and I both have professional training as writers. We went to school for that. And, you know, uh, we were both trained by very good people. And one of the keys to good art is believability and identification, right? That we need as good writers to create worlds and people who the reader can identify with and who's the world they're living in, even if it's a fantasy world, still follows many of the same laws that our world follows. Like when you were in school, what did you learn about writing from these people as far as it dealt with realism?
Well, yeah, I took writing workshops in college. I mean, I think a lot of the things I learned were just very rudimentary, like cliche stuff. Like you want a lot of details. You want the world to be convincing. You want to write what you know. Sometimes, as was said.
You write details. Those are like two really key points. Every writing teacher worth their salt should tell you these things. Not that you can only do those two things, but when you say write what you know, what they're saying is, if you share your reality in fiction, that part of the reality that is universal will come, the reader will get it. And
Well, we're getting into a different kind of discussion though about these parasocial relationships. I mean, we didn't talk about parasocial relationships when I was in my writing classes. I mean, but it is really interesting to think about because when you start thinking about it from this angle, you start to think, well, maybe I need to make characters that audiences really want to identify with, that want to be, I mean, you think about a world like Harry Potter. I mean, what is she doing? She's writing a world that you wish would exist, that you wish you could live in.
But it also has a lot of similarities to the world that you do live in as a reader, because even if we don't live in a world of magic, most of us do go to school and most of us have crushes and most of us have to study at that age, and most of us want to either do well, or we want to be good to our parents, or we want to find ourselves, or we're afraid of stuff. So the emotional reality of the characters in Harry Potter does parallel the emotional reality of many of the readers, not just as children, but as adults.
Well, I always think that a work, there has to be something real in the work that the audience can hang their hat on, can feel. So, like for instance, A New Hope, the first Star Wars movie that ever came out, like most of it doesn't make any sense, right? Except for like some of the relationships between the characters is very good. You know, some of the characters are very believable. You know, like the farm boy that gets embroiled in the fight for the a fight for like what'll happen in the entire empire, the entire universe. I mean, that's
Yeah,
like
no,
a
but you're right. But good writing, good acting, good filmmaking, good storytelling in that sense is the ability for us to, at least during the 2 hours we're in the movie theater, or however many hours it takes to read the book, is to transport us into a world that we're willing to suspend disbelief. And when you are being trained to be an artist, that's what you're doing. You know, one of the other things I do on the side is storytelling, where I will talk about personal events that have happened in my life on a topic maybe for 5 to 8 minutes. And I'll use the exact same rules I learned in playwriting for storytelling, because they're not that different. You know, talk about what you know, right? Give
mm-hmm.
details, be vulnerable, be open, be honest, be truthful. And after it's over, people will come up to me who I don't know, and they'll want to engage with me because something I said
You've just
they had a similar experience with.
you just fostered a parasocial interaction, a relationship with that person.
Exactly right. Have you ever had that experience as an artist where people wanted to talk to you afterwards because somehow they saw something of themselves in your narrative?
I remember in high school, I was in Taming of the Shrew. I had a small part, and I remember some kid came up to me like weeks later, and he said he saw me in the play, and he really liked me, and that was like the strongest parasocial interaction I've ever had in my life, I think.
Well, it's kind of cool to be in the opposite end of it, but let's talk about the more realistic thing, which is, you know, the whole point of parasocial relationship is it exists in your head. Your relationship with this person is all in your, it's almost like a crush with a girl that you've never spoken to, or you've only said hi. But what happens when you actually meet in real life a real celebrity that you like? Uh, that great disconnect. So like when you know, I'm assuming as a kid you like Mork and Mindy.
Yes.
You were probably a fan of Robin Williams, as most of our generation was.
Yep.
And then
So,
all of a sudden you're actually meeting Robin Williams.
well, I took photographs of an improv show that Robin Williams was in, and I went backstage to take photos of him in the cast, and so I didn't have much of an interaction with him, but you know, I did have this sense when I went backstage, like, I don't know anything about this guy. He's like a complete stranger to me. I didn't know what to say, you know, and you know, he's a shy, soft-spoken guy. He's not on like he is on stage in person. You know, he's like normal in person, which, you know, a lot of celebrities, they're just normal in person. You know, they do like an
So
act.
you had that disconnect, that cognitive dissonance, where the Robin Williams that lived in your head was not the Robin Williams you were meeting.
Yeah, you know, I kind of expected him to be really outgoing, but he wasn't.
Right, because the Robin Williams that you know is the comedic persona Robin Williams, not the real Robin Williams. And I know you also, when you were in that Radiohead video where you're working, technically you're working with Radiohead, you met Radiohead. What was that like?
Well, you know, I ended up having some kind of brief interaction with a lot of the people in the band because I was on set like for many hours and nobody had anything to do, most people. And everybody, it was interesting because everybody in the band was completely different, you know. They all were completely different people, so it wasn't like you know, because you ever watch like the Beatles movies, the old Beatles movies, where the
Yeah,
Beatles are
yeah.
like a fun group of friends that like do everything together. So Radiohead was like not like that at all. And they're all very different.
And that must have been different too because you didn't grow up with Radiohead. They were relatively new,
They had
and
just they had a one hit song, "Creep," and
yeah,
yeah,
and
and I was
they
in
were
Fake
not that
Plastic
much.
Trees.
They were not. They were just a little older than you. They weren't a lot older than you.
Yeah, they were. I don't even know. I think yeah, they're a little older than me at the time. Yeah, so
I think, but not by more than 2 or 3 years.
mhm.
So it was like you were more on an equal footing in that scenario.
Yeah, and they were very normal people too. Well, actually, they might have been a bit older than me at the time. But anyway, they I was in college. But anyway, yeah, they were fairly. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of weird to use the word like normal. I mean, how do what do you really mean? But
Well, but that's
there
they
was
were so profoundly normal.
yeah, well, average. I guess average is a better word. They're just average people. I mean, there was
And
nothing like
that works against the parasocial relationship, which is built on the idea that. So I'm going to give you two examples from my own life that are very opposite. Uh, I was always a big fan of Joan Rivers growing up. Again, because she's Jewish, I'm Jewish. I loved her on Howard Stern. I loved her on. I even saw her movie Rabbit Test. I loved her on The Tonight Show. She was the only Jewish woman on TV who sounded like my family. You know what I'm saying? There
hmm
wasn't a lot of Jewish women of that generation, and she was so like a family member. I felt such a sense of connectivity. Look, the woman built a fortune on the home shopping network, which we won't have time to get into, but it's an excellent example of how a parasocial relationship where, you're going to give $100 to buy a commemorative plate if you get to talk to Joan Rivers for 30 seconds. Uh, but I really have always been a big fan of hers. I've read her books. I've just thought, she's the best. So one day, uh, here in Westwood, a friend waiting to get picked up by my then a friend of mine, and I'm standing outside, and I'm literally maybe 6 feet away from a theater where Joan Rivers is in rehearsal for a play, and 6 feet from me is Joan Rivers also waiting for someone to pick her up. So we're both standing there. We're about 6 feet apart, and I look at her as you would look at any famous person, and guess what she's doing, Randall? She is looking straight ahead. Now, you know this, it's universal, right? If you look at somebody and they don't return their look but just continue to look straight ahead, what does that mean?
they probably don't want to talk to you.
Yeah, it means buzz off, buddy. So literally, for what must have been 5 to 10 minutes, I'm just standing 6 feet away or 8 feet away, but not too far, not that much far from this woman, pretending not to care that this woman who I like so much doesn't even want to talk to me. And that kind of really it hurt. It hurt. It really did hurt. I thought for certain that I could, and we were alone. I could have said, "Hey, Joan Rivers, I like you, and I'm a fan of your work," but I just felt like she didn't. She would have looked my way if that was the case. And in that moment, I realized that I don't really know Joan Rivers at all. Now, the opposite experience was, again, about 20 years ago, a little over that, when I was a younger guy. When I first moved out to LA, I got a job working at women's shoes at Macy's Beverly Center. And I just happened to get Angela Lansbury as a client, someone to come in who wanted to buy shoes that day. Humongous fan of Angela Lansbury. I had seen her in Sweeney Todd when I was 13, which is a musical by Stephen Sondheim, and it really helped me want to become. It showed me the power of theater, and eventually would lead me to become a playwright. So, uh, anyway, I ended up telling her that she said something, and I told her I saw in Sweeney Todd, and we chatted, and she told me about what it's like to work with Sondheim, and she told me what it's like to be in the play, and I told her about my interest in playwriting, and she thought it was great. And I was trying to help her find some shoes. She is her foot is larger than normally women's shoes at Macy's goes up to 10. She's like a 10 and a half, so we don't have a lot of those shoes. So for about 20 minutes, I hung out with her and her husband, and I would come on and bring out shoes and chat. And none of the shoes ever really fit her because we just didn't have that many. But it was a lot of fun, and I really did feel like we were hitting it off. And then just as she was leaving, she took out her card, and she wrote down not just her business number, but she also wrote down her home phone, and she rewrote down her shoe size so I would remember, and like what kind of heel length and styles she liked. She said, "Chris, anytime you see a shoe that you think I might like, it's in my size 10 and a half, call me and set up an appointment, and I'll come down here and we'll hang out." And I'll try on the shoot. And it was a really nice invitation for me to get to know Angela Lansbury. But after she left, all I kept on thinking of is that Angela Lansbury is only going to know me as the guy who sells her shoes, which may not have been true, but that's what I thought. And like, I don't want to have a real relationship with real Angela Lansbury on this term. I'd rather she just go back to being an imaginary parasocial. So I kind of threw that out to continue on with this thing.
And you never contacted her. They never saw her again.
I threw her a card. So I really feel like where this parasocial relationship really kind of came to the fore recently was during the pandemic's still going on, but the lockdown of last year and earlier this year, where we were literally all like kids at home, where we couldn't go anywhere by ourselves. All of this social media. Now, for me, it's TV. I'm a TV kid. So I started to go back to binge watching and having a parasocial relationship. Was one of the favorite ones was The Office. You know, like I loved hanging out in this pre-COVID world with these identifiable work people. And I always stopped watching after Michael Scott leaves the show so I can control it. And I knew all the stories, so I'm just going back and again. And you were telling me you and Annette also did binge watching during the
Yeah,
lockdown?
well, we watched a lot of shows. I mean, I can't even think of what they were at this point, but yeah, we watched a bunch of shows.
So when you're watching reruns, and I haven't watched even a lot of old Star Treks or Schitt's Creek, which is a new show, you know, when you're
we watched
watching,
Schitt's Creek.
you know, you're spending time in a world. You're spending time with characters, and you're talking about them as if they were real people, and you're surreptitiously watching them, feeling things, and you're identifying them. And when you're in the middle of something as insane as a lockdown, where it feels like the whole world is going to die, and you're never going to get to go outside again or really be with your real friends because you're not allowed to be with your real friends. Yeah, this parasocial relationship with fictional characters became a great escape hatch. And then also, you know, with news and talk shows, right? When watching talk shows, like I like Seth Meyers and Stephen Colbert, and here's Seth Meyers, and he's in his apartment, he's at home. I can see that he's just wearing regular people clothing, like myself. None of us are allowed to get our hair cut, so his hair looks terrible, and you can see that there's background noise from real stuff, and you can see the books behind people that they really read. You still see it if you're watching the news. When they have news people come on, you'll often still see that they're at home and maybe the camera's on an unflattering angle, or you're like, wait a second, I read that same novel. It weirdly enough, once you get rid of the makeup, the stage, and any of the gloss of professional stuff, when you get rid of the professional gloss and any of that stuff, it increases the identification, right? Because and I'll pick on Seth Meyers, but it could have been anybody. Seth Meyers is at home, I'm at home. Seth Meyers doesn't see any of his friends. I don't see any of my friends. We're both battling out for toilet paper. So I really felt like the parasocial relationships really come to they're just very strong during the lockdown. More so, I would argue, even with fictional characters than with non-fictional characters.
Well, you might be right, but
And one of the things I was listening to a lot was podcasts. So I really got into Mark Maron, and Mark Maron, who's around my age, and I've seen him in concert, and I've seen him, and I would listen to him. He lost his girlfriend, and he was going through mourning, and I could identify with everything that was going on. We developed this symbiotic thing. I wrote to Mark Maron, Randall, and I asked him if he felt that the confessional style that he was doing, that did he feel like he was fostering a parasocial relationship, a one-sided relationship where people knew him even though they don't. I Instagrammed him this on Monday, and you know what Mark said to me?
What did he say?
I don't know. He never replied because Mark Maron doesn't know me. He's got 1 trillion followers on his podcast and 1 trillion followers on Instagram. You know, I can watch him 3 blocks away from me in Glendale talking to his cat. He can't take the time to just answer Chris. I even said I have a podcast. It's a research Could you just tell me so that I could be a better show? I really thought that Mark and I had more of a relationship than that. And this gets us into the dark side of parasocial relationships, which is the belief that we have an expectation. So there's a great article that just came out about 2 weeks ago in the Vulture. The comic John Mulaney.
Yes.
So John Mulaney is one of the clean comics, always wears a suit, and a lot of his comedy, it's very funny, but he's always like this clean-cut Midwestern guy. He used to tell a lot of jokes about his wife and him and how he doesn't have kids, and just he's an everyday man. He's very likable, very clean-cut. No Pete Davidson. Those versions of their friends, and very smart and funny. Anyway, at the end of last year, it turns out he has a drug addiction. He appeared on Seth Meyers with an overcoat and sunglasses, behaving very weirdly. And then the next thing I know, he is in rehab for a couple of months. I guess Seth Meyers had and a couple of their other friends had what do they call that when everyone gets together with an interdiction? Whatever, when people get together and
Intervention.
Intervention, thank you. So they have that, and he did 3 months of that, and then he divorces his wife, and his wife goes on Twitter to say how heartbroken she is that that's happening. And then I just found out that then you find out a few months later he's dating Olivia Wilde, and then you find out that just recently that they're having a kid now, and you do the math and you realize, wait a second, he was still married and just out of rehab or in during when he had her knocked up. And it was either Olivia Wilde or Olivia Munn, because one of them was married to Ted Lasso, Jason Sudeikis, and then divorced Jason Sudeikis. So that's why when you're watching Ted Lasso, and Ted Lasso has all these issues with getting over the loss of his wife and his kids, it's really Jason Sudeikis getting over the loss, I assume, right? So anyway, the point is, I don't really know John Mulaney, but we think
it's Olivia Munn.
Olivia Munn. Oh, okay. So wait, was Olivia Munn also with Jason Sudeikis, or is that Olivia Wilde?
I gotta look it up. Yeah, I think she was with. Oh wait, no, that was Olivia Wilde. You're getting your Olivias mixed up.
Okay, so either way, it's like, oh my God, I know these people. That's what they're doing on Ted Lasso. That's John Mulaney betrayed me. But the truth is, gossip creates. Another thing we talk about is gossip creates this belief that because you know the dirt on these people, you know these people.
Well, there's a whole ecosystem of celebrity gossip, celebrity watching, celebrity following. Like Us Magazine is a perfect example of that. The Inquirer to a certain extent. It's a whole industry that's sort of devoted to benefiting off these parasocial relationships people have with these celebrities. But everybody benefits.
And it creates the illusion that I know John Mulaney when I don't.
Right.
And you see this a lot, actually, when two variations of this, and there's a lot of research in this, like people get very upset when a TV show they've been following for a long time goes off the air. It feels like a death. It's, like, oh my God, they canceled Sex in the City. What am I going to do Sunday? I like to hang out with the girls and watch that show. And then there's like celebrity death, which is even more devastating. And you and I were just talking before the show about the two greatest celebrity deaths of our life was the death of Princess Diana and the death of Michael Jackson, which were streamed on the news and live TV so that we could all observe in the morning. And I don't know about you, but I never met Princess Diana and I never met Michael Jackson. And I'm not entirely sure why, and I don't mean this, except the passing of any human being is always sad. Why should it matter? Why is the death of Princess Diana or Michael Jackson any more momentous than the death of my great uncle?
Well, people think they know these people. People think they knew Princess Diana. They saw her wedding. Her wedding was a huge television spectacle. Michael Jackson, of course. Everybody sort of watched Michael Jackson grow up over the years. It's definitely the result of parasocial relationships. I mean,
And I mean,
these celebrities die. People think they knew them.
right. And then another dark thing is Donald Trump, because we're Democrats, we hate Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a parasocial relationship. We came to know him through TV and all of his media things. And when he ran for
Twitter.
president, right. So when he ran for president, we already felt like we had grown up with Donald Trump. So we're just electing our buddy, right?
People, yeah, Trump's fans think they know him. And what's interesting is when some of these authors, like all these books come out about behind the scenes in the Trump administration, and they talk about like what was really going on behind the scenes. And none of those books seem to have any influence on Trump's fan base. Because,
Right. And it's funny because even if you don't like Trump because you grew up watching so many people on Saturday Night Live impersonate Trump, you still think you know Trump. Whether you like him or dislike him, you've had so much of Trump in your life prior to him becoming president that it's like, oh, I know what I'm getting with Trump.
right, but it's all fake, right? I mean, this is the one thing I want to say about these parasocial relationships. I think that, I mean, even with influencers, social media, I mean, they even call themselves content creators. I mean, this stuff is fake. There's no like real relationship. There's no like actual depiction of these people's lives. I mean, I don't think.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
would definitely say the darkest version of what you just said is stalking, right? Celebrity stalking is maybe the darkest version of parasocial relationship. One of the big celebrity deaths that affected me was the death of John Lennon, where David Chapman, a fan, decided the best way to have a relationship with John Lennon was to go out and kill him.
yeah, so that's a good example of that. I mean, I think another dark side is what we've just been talking about is when the celebrity creates a public persona that's just completely different from their real persona. So like
Well,
John Mulaney, you were talking
yeah,
about a minute ago. I think that's a perfect example. I mean, a lot of people thought of John Mulaney as like the nice guy comic, and
yeah.
family man, and just a great guy or something. He's a guy you'd want to like hang out with or something. And now here he is. Getting addicted to drugs and dumping his wife and marrying some hot celebrity woman.
Yeah. And that's really the PG-13, right? Because Me Too, that's the big stuff. Like, oh my God, I grew up with Bill Cosby. I feel like I know Bill Cosby. I knew him from the Bill Cosby Show. I knew him from Fat Albert and the Kids. I knew him from the Cosby Show. That was not the one where he's a youth counselor, but he's Dr. Huxtable. And now you have to tell me he was a rapist, a horrifying man. And you feel betrayed and you feel shock and shame, and it's a death of a sort. So it works on both ends. I'll finish this part with telling an amazingly embarrassing time that I violated this, because it really shows you how bad it can be even for someone like myself. So Jon Stewart, before he was the host of The Daily Show in the early '90s, had a show called The Jon Stewart Show on MTV, where he did interview celebrities. He was hip, he was cool. That was like, it ran from like 90 to 92. So it's early 93, and I'm living on the Upper West Side, and I've just gone drinking, and I'm super drunk with my best friend, and we stop into a pizzeria right by a comedy club, and the only two people there is Jon Stewart and a friend, and I go right up to him after I order my pizza, and I go, "Hey, I know you, I know you," because I can't even like use the proper English. And he's like, "Oh yeah, we went to high school together." And I think about it because he's not that much older than me, and I can identify with him. No, no, you're Jon Stewart. I watched you on MTV. And there was like an episode, I guess, where Christy Swanson made out with him. Like, you made out with Christy Swanson, and you interviewed Terry Hatcher. She's hot. And I just literally, my friend had to kind of drag me away when the pizzas were ready. Jon Stewart handled me remarkably well.
He was a gentleman.
He was friendly. His buddy was there who thought it was goofy and fun. They could not have been more polite and sweeter, and I could have never more deserved to be told to piss off. But that is what I'm saying. That's the worst part of it. So where do you think as a society, just to wrap up, what is the future of parasocial relationships, Randall?
Well, just let me say one more thing about parasocial relationships is like I already just said that I think almost all these relationships are all these celebrities, the persona they're presenting is fake. for almost all of them. But I don't think that's an accident. I think that, like, if you were your true self, like a lot of people get on the internet and on social media and they're their true self, they're like a normal average person, you won't get a celebrity following. It's like people want somebody better than them. They want somebody. They want to develop a parasocial relationship with somebody. Like your experience with Angela Lansbury is a perfect example. You don't want her to be a normal person, Chris. That just a woman like every other woman you meet buying shoes at your store. You want her to be Angela Lansbury, the actress. And so I think that for the people that the celebrities that develop these parasocial relationships, they either fall into it or they learn it, by default, by evolution. They just trial and error. They learn that they can't be their normal self in online. The public wants somebody bigger and better than them, and so they end up creating a fake person, and for them it's some of them can't handle it. You can see like the drug addictions, the turmoil in their private lives. I mean, you could probably go back, to the early days of celebrity. You're talking about like the early days of Hollywood, 1910s and 20s. That's probably what you're probably seeing that, because there's a divide between somebody's public persona and their actual self, and it's probably difficult for a lot of them. But you want to talk about the future of where this is going to go?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, social media really creates an opportunity to invent these personas like nobody's business. Like, I mean, you don't even have to be an actor. You don't even have to be part of some large corporation. You can just get on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, and you can create a larger than life persona, and then suddenly people will be attracted to it. So I don't know. The future is just going to be just more of it, I guess. Just more fakery, more ridiculous personas all over the internet. I guess we're just going to have to get used to it.
Well, I definitely think at day's end, and we didn't cover things like computer games and music as much as I would have loved to, but as our sense of entertainment becomes more immersive and as the boundaries thin, and as a society we feel more isolated and more alone, we're probably going to go deeper into it, and then hopefully we'll cycle out of it and maybe get into a period where we will value our own relationships and our own experiences in our own world. I really hope so. Wow, this was a long show. If you stuck around this long, please let us know. And if you live in LA, we'll meet you for a beer or a coffee or a slice of pizza. Because honestly, the commitment you made to put up to hear us talk about this is so great. And if you're a friend, well, in our own lives, then we'll definitely meet for coffee after the show. Because thank you, that was a lot.
Yeah,
Until next time.
we're pretty real on this show, and our audience numbers reflect that.
All right, folks. Well, until next time, I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.